Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's methodology breakdown. We'll be talking about American Carbon Registry's landfill gas destruction and beneficial use projects methodology. Our agenda for today would include some information about Envision blockchain, a Guardian overview. We'll do a quick recap of our previous webinars. We'll also talk about carbon credits and methodologies before we get into our policy development checklist. Then we'll also talk about landfill gas destruction and a little bit of information about the eligibility for this methodology and our digital policy. We'll go over the schema and workflow that's specific to the policy we'll demo today, and we'll also go over some information about Guardian APIs, the new version of MGS, which is beta version 10, and a demo of the policy. Envision Blockchain Solutions builds applications for the Web3 space, and we focus on guiding organizations through 3 major milestones on their Web3 journey. This includes use case analysis, proof of concept development, and scaled deployment. Since 2020, the open source Guardian maintained by Envision Blockchain with support from HBAR Foundation and Hashgraph has utilized the Hedera public network to enable transparent, auditable, and traceable documentation of the emission process and life cycles of digital environmental tokens. In 2021, leveraging its expertise, Envision Blockchain introduced the Managed Guardian System, also known as MGS. This is a SaaS solution tailored for the carbon market to simplify environmental application development, offering core Guardian features like the policy workflow engine on a scalable platform. MGS launched in 2022, and it supports organizations in creating traceable environmental tokens on Hedera's ledger, advancing global sustainability efforts. So some of our previous webinars include AMS 3D, VM44. We also have some for plastics like PWRM 0001, gold standards methane emission reduction in rice cultivation methodology, and recently, we covered one from Global Carbon Council, which was focused on renewable energy generation and projects applying electricity to the grid. However, we've been doing these methodology breakdowns for a little over a year now, so there are many policies that you can look through. You could see the demo that we've done for them, and we've also gone over some of the Guardian features in these videos. So if you're interested, you could find them on the Envision Blockchain YouTube channel. Since we'll be talking about carbon credits during our demo today, this is what we'll be issuing at the end of the policy workflow. I think it's important to go over what this is and what a methodology is. So a carbon credit represents a measurable reduction or removal of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent from the atmosphere. It's awarded to projects that successfully reduce greenhouse gas emissions, providing a way to offset emissions and support environmental sustainability. Now, what is a methodology? A carbon credit methodology outlines the actions and calculations required to determine the emission reductions or removals associated with a project. It includes scientifically informed steps to estimate the impact on carbon emissions with over 400 methodologies available. They each vary in quality, complexity, and feasibility. Now, when we create these policies, we do follow certain steps, and that's what we've tried to outline here. The first stage is always research and preparation. So you just want to make sure that you're understanding all of the processes that go into this. So it might be the steps that a registry follows, all the documentation that they require, way before we even get into the specific methodologies. So just to show an example of what this could look like, this is the ACR website, and they have a specific area where you could find any program resources. This would include any templates that they have. It could be within an Excel, a PDF, or a Word doc. But you'll see all the forms that they require. So it is important to go through this, make sure you know what it is that you would have to collect from a user so that you could include it in your policy. Then we move into methodology selection, and just like I showed there, their program resources, they also have a tab for methodologies. And depending on the activities that your project might include, then there will be a specific methodology that you could follow. But you always want to make sure that the activities fall under their eligibility criteria, you have the correct location. So the policy that we're working on today is only to be used within the United States. And you also want to make sure that the data that you have from all of your project activities is data that can be used within that methodology to get your calculations for your baseline, your project emissions, or even your emission reductions. Then moving into the third step here is workflow research. I think that it doesn't always have to follow this order, because you could start working on your workflow from step one. When you're looking for all of these documents, you're researching the registries, program processes. So you could always start from there, start working on what the methodology itself also requires, what roles you're seeing included in these processes, and create your workflow. Then we move into the fourth step, which is to map your quantification approach. So this goes into the specific methodology. And we can see with the one that we're going over today, when we talk about the quantification approach, we can go down to some of their calculations here. So we'll see that we have a section here of quantification of GHG emission reductions, and there's always these equations that are included in here to calculate the environmental benefit from this project. So what we do is we go through each one of these and we start mapping them out in an Excel, which can be found in the Guardian and can be downloaded to your computer, where you can just easily insert all of this information and start working on the calculations that you need to include. So that moves us into the fifth step here, which, as I mentioned, there is an Excel that can be used for this schema creation step. However, you can do this within the Guardian UI as well. It just gets pretty complex sometimes, so it might be easier for you to use an Excel template than to have to go through the UI and manually create all of these fields that you're going to require from the user, and understand how they each connect within an equation as well. And the last step here is the policy workflow engine. So all the steps that you've outlined in step 3 here in your workflow research will be used when you get to the policy workflow engine. However, instead of having a presentation of all of the steps that we want, all of the roles that we want, we'll be outlining this using coding blocks. And this should define every role, every step, the information flow, calculations, any document creations, and minting rules as well. So now we're moving into some specifics about landfill gas systems. Landfill gas systems capture methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. It's produced from decomposing organic waste in landfills, and some of the processes that we see here involves installing wells and a network of pipes to collect and funnel the gas. Once it's captured, the methane is destroyed through combustion or flaring, significantly reducing its environmental impact. And these systems reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They contribute to local air quality improvement and support regulatory compliance with the EPA standards under the Clean Air Act. Most municipal solid waste in the United States is deposited in landfills, where bacterial decomposition produces landfill gas. This is primarily methane and carbon dioxide. The EPA identifies landfills as some of the largest sources of human-caused methane emissions, which accounts for 16% of our total methane emissions here in the United States. The solid waste industry has reduced methane emissions by nearly 40% since 1990 through gas collection and destruction. And that's why it's important to have some of these methodologies or these digital policies to track all of these reductions that we've already worked towards, and we could quantify all of these benefits. In this slide, we'll cover some key information for the landfill gas projects under this specific methodology. So this methodology defines these projects as landfill gas projects that aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by capturing and either destroying or beneficially using methane generated from landfill waste decomposition. These projects generate carbon offset credits by mitigating methane emissions that would otherwise escape into the atmosphere. And some of the eligible activities include flare combustion, open or enclosed, energy conversion via turbines, boilers, or generators, injection of processed landfill gas into natural gas pipelines, the use of landfill gas in vehicles, deployment of automated landfill gas collection systems. And again, it's just important to note that these projects must be located in the United States. Now, it also mentions additionality tests. So projects must demonstrate GHG reductions beyond regulatory or common practice using a practice-based performance standard or ACR's 3-prong additionality test. When it comes to the crediting period, these projects can go on for 10 years. And it is renewable upon revalidation. For the monitoring requirements, there should be continuous monitoring of landfill gas flow, methane content and destruction device operations, and regular calibration and third-party validation of the monitoring equipment. So why do we digitize methodologies? Digitizing methodologies, such as those from American Carbon Registry, offers significant benefits, including standardization and improved accuracy in calculations. By automating the calculation process within Guardian, the responsibility of applying complex equations shifts from a project developer to the system, ensuring consistency in environmental benefit quantifications. Additionally, Guardian's digital forms streamline project registration and verification, enhancing efficiency and reducing errors. This approach fosters greater transparency, accountability, and improved data management, ultimately supporting more reliable emissions reporting and environmental claims. So you'll see today that we have captured a lot of the forms that are required by American Carbon Registry, and we can see that within the Excel. We could also see it when we demo the policy today. So before I open up the Excel that we created for this policy, I just want to go over what Guardian schemas are. So schemas are templates or guides that help us organize, structure, and understand environmental data. It makes it easier to manage and analyze this complex information. They define how different pieces of information should be structured and presented, making it easier for both people and machines to read and use the data. So here to the right, you can just see what it looks like to create a schema using the Guardian UI. However, we do offer the option of creating these schemas within Excel. So here you'll see the one that we've created for the ACR landfill policy. And I would say the most important thing when we're looking at this template is that when you download it and you use it, you want to make sure that you're keeping everything the way that it's structured. This just allows Guardian to parse all the information that you have in here correctly, and that we see no errors when we try to import. So at the very top, you have where we can put a name to this schema. This is going to be our project proponent registration. It's used whenever a new project proponent creates an account. We collect all this information, and we allow the administrator to approve or reject that account. Then we have where we collect a description. This is optional, so if you leave it blank, that's okay. But maybe we could have put in here that this schema is used when we create a project proponent account, just so that there's more information around what this is used for. Then we move down to the schema type. So we have 3 different schema types, which could be a verifiable credential, encrypted verifiable credential, and a subschema. So currently for this one, we would have it as a verifiable credential. This is going to show up in our trust chain when we see each one of the cards of the roles and activities that we've conducted throughout the workflow. If we had something that needs to be private, let's say that I'm collecting some information, maybe it's a passport number, and I don't want that to be public, then we can go ahead and set this as an encrypted verifiable credential. When you import this into the Guardian, you'll be able to select some private checkboxes for all the fields that you would like to be encrypted. And for sub-schemas, I can show an example of that in the emission reductions sheet. But starting here to the left, you'll see that we have required field. This can be yes or no. If I select yes and a user never put in an answer for that specific field, then they won't be allowed to submit that form and move forward. And if you select no, then that means it's optional. It's okay if the user doesn't put anything in there. We also have field types. So you'll see that I have something like help text. This is just going to be information for the user. We're not trying to collect any information for that field. Let's say I have where I want them to put in a name or a paragraph, then we can identify that as a string. And there's many other options like numbers, enum, URL, JSON. So it's up to you to set a definition for the type of answer that you're expecting back. And I'll show examples of parameter and visibility in a different sheet. But for question, it's just going to be what you're asking the user to submit, and you can go ahead and put a description and allow multiple answers. So you'll see that most of these are no. That just means that we're only going to provide one answer box for the user. For organization name, meaning that we can have multiple organizations who are going to work under this project proponent, I have selected yes. So the user could go ahead and put different organization names in there. And I'm going to mute myself for just 1 second and let this truck pass. Okay, so moving into the emission reductions sheet, here we have some examples of what it could look like to have some values in the parameter column and visibility. So this sheet is probably one of the most important. It's going to be where we collect all of the data that's needed to get all the calculations. I like to put in a comment in here just to track what equation this is that we're representing in this Excel sheet from the methodology itself. So we see that this is equation 16 for the GHG emission reductions. And we'll see that we have an equation outlined in the answer box. So when it comes to anything that's going to be auto-calculated by the Guardian, we can put hidden in the visibility column. This means that the user won't have to see this field because we're not requiring them to submit any data for that field. The Guardian will use the data that has been submitted to run those calculations once you submit your form. You'll also see that for some of them, we have true or false. So if we move down to the project emissions, I think I could provide a simpler explanation there for that one. So here we have project emissions. This is what we'll consider a sub-schema. And you'll see that we're linking that sub-schema here under the field type. And we've selected no to that sub-schema. That just means that we only need to use that sub-schema once. The user won't be allowed to use it more than once. Then we have our project emissions that are going to be hidden, and we follow up here with a question asking them if there are any CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion, and they can say yes or no. So if we just keep an eye on this true here, if I were to select no, that would change to false. So what we're doing here is making sure that the sub-schema for any CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion is visible to the user if it's needed, meaning that if they select yes, we need the data for the sub-schema and we want that to be visible for them. If we select no and it shows up as false, now we can go ahead and hide that because we don't need any of those data points. This isn't an activity that's going to be included in their project, so we don't need to calculate any emissions for that. And now we see that we have some div 0 errors here. This is just because we don't have any sample data placed into that sheet. This is the sheet that we would want to import into the Guardian, but I've included 2 sheets with sample data. So we have sample 1 that I've noted here is coming from ACR. This is a case study from their Appendix B. And we are seeing emission reductions here. We also have data for equations 1 all the way to equation 16 that has been provided for this case study. You'll see that we have many of the same fields. This is just for this sample case, so we wouldn't want to import this specific sheet. This is just for you to test your equations, make sure that everything is coming back correctly. And it is great when we do have a case study that we could use for something like this. So here you'll see that we have data coming from the year 1995 all the way to 2014 in order for us to calculate all of our baseline emissions, project emissions. You'll see that we have project emissions coming back here as 1,260 as well. And if we go all the way back to the top, that should give us our emission reductions, where this first value is going to be our baseline emissions multiplied by our global warming potential, and it's subtracting the project emissions there. Now, sample 2 has less data, and this is because this sample is coming from a project that has submitted a monitoring report, and we were able to pull out some data from there. And this is only for the year 2021. They also don't have all of the equation requirements that sample 1 had. So sample 1, I mentioned that we used equations 1 all the way to equation 16. However, here we're only using equation 1. We're skipping 2 to 10 because it's not needed for their project. So you'll see that we have a subschema just for the data needed for equations 2 to 10. And then we're using equations 11 to 16 to get the rest of our project emissions and calculate our emission reductions here. And so the last thing I want to note before we go back to the presentation is that if you are creating a policy for the Guardian, maybe you had to collect a few requirements for equations like this project here that only needed equations 1 and 11 to 16, and you can create a policy that only captures that. However, the policies that we're creating here for this webinar includes every equation. So if your project was like sample 1 that needs all of them included, you can go ahead and use this policy. And if your project is like sample 2 that has specific requirements, you could also use this policy. And we do that by building in questionnaires to make sure that we're giving you the right path to follow, and we're also collecting the correct data points in order to draw our calculations here at the end. And now moving back to the presentation, this is what we mentioned where you can use that Excel like the one I just showed and import it into the Guardian. So you'll see that it gets pretty complex when you're working with these methodologies that are pretty large and just collect so much data. So instead of using the UI, like we saw in the previous slide, to create these schemas and put all of those fields and requirements, you can always use that Excel and import it back in. Or maybe you want to review an existing policy or make certain changes to it. You can also export the Excel and make those changes and put it back into the Guardian. Okay, so before we move into our demo, this is going to be the flow that we are following. So here you'll see that we have different roles like the project proponent, the validation verification body, and the American Carbon Registry, which could be our administrator. So starting from the top, we have where we are creating this project proponent account. We're collecting all the information we need from them, and the administrator can go ahead and approve or reject that account. Then moving into this next step, we have the project proponent submitting their GHG project listing form. They can submit that and the administrator will review it, ultimately approve or reject. You'll see that we have these red rejections, meaning that if it's rejected, we're going back to that step and we can always resubmit. Once it's been approved, then we go ahead and change the status of this project to listed. We can create a VVB account and submit their registration form. It could get approved or rejected by the admin. The VVB will submit a project-specific conflict of interest form, send that to the administrator, and the administrator has the decision of if there's a conflict of interest, they can identify that, and we'll see that we have a comment box where they can say to the project proponent or anyone who sees a status update that a new verifier is required due to a conflict of interest or something along those lines can be put into the comment box. If there is no conflict of interest, then we can continue this workflow and the project proponent can go ahead and submit their GHG project plan. They can assign that to a verifier where they'll begin their validation services and they can submit a validation report and validation opinion. The project proponent will review these documents and they can assign it now to the administrator that will also review it. Once accepted, we can create a new VBB account, or use the existing VBB company or third party that was already working on the validation. And the project proponent will go ahead and submit their forms for emission reductions calculations, monitoring reports, environmental and social impact assessments, and submit that to the VBB. The VBB then can start their verification services and submit a verification report and verification opinion. Then the project proponent will review these. They have a view-only access to those documents, and the administrator has the ultimate approval of it. So once they've approved the verification report and specifically the verification opinion, then we would start the issuance of credits. So anything that's been outlined in the verification opinion, this could be certain credits for the vintage 2021, maybe it's vintage 2022 or so on. We can mint for a specific year, and we'll see that today in the demo as well. Now, it is important to note that Guardian, you can use the UI, you can also integrate it with your own user platforms through our APIs, and it would act as an engine behind these systems. This integration allows for seamless data exchange, ensuring that all information sent and received is traceable and auditable. And by utilizing Guardian's diverse capabilities, users can enhance their own platform functionalities while maintaining transparency and accountability in their data management processes. Envision Blockchain is excited to announce Managed Guardian Service Beta version 10. This is a major milestone in delivering the power of the Guardian to organizations in a fully managed, scalable environment. It's designed with insights from our years as the builders and maintainers of the open source hedera Guardian. And MGS was created to make it easier for enterprises to harness the Guardian's capabilities without managing the underlying infrastructure. This beta version 10 release represents the final phase before we bring MGS to a full commercial availability in 2025. And so in this version, you'll see dual pathways for users with our UI and API availabilities, enhancing accessibility and data security. There's improved search capabilities for tracking policies, carbon offsets, transactions, and ensuring real-time data transparency using the Guardian indexer. There's tenant-based models tailored to diverse environmental strategies, from carbon offsets to emissions reporting. It ensures secure data handling with end-to-end traceability for emission lifecycle management, automatic updates and performance monitoring for uninterrupted service, and a comprehensive help desk and technical assistance for all MGS users. So with that being said, we're moving into our demo, which will be in the latest version of MGS. And so here, just by clicking on the top, it would take us to the page that I'm on currently. This is going to be your profile. This is a testnet account that I'm on today, so we can access our different users using dry run in the policy without having to log in and out. This allows you to test any policy easily without having to create different user accounts, which could take more time, and just make sure that your policy is working correctly before you publish it. So here we'll see our account information, like our username, our password. Maybe you want to change your password for security reasons. You can go ahead and do that on this page. There's also your tenant ID, your hedera information, like your account ID, user topic, initialization topic, and your balance, and documents that include your DID document and BC document. So if we open up this policies tab, you'll see that we can open up our schemas that I've been talking about in the previous slides. And I currently only have one policy imported. So if I open that up, you can see all what we saw as sheets in Excel are all in here as our schemas. And if you see that we have some that say none, this is going to be our sub schemas. And if we go down, you see our VCs that are going to reflect in our trust chain later on. And maybe we want to open one of these up. So we have a simplified view and an advanced view. There aren't many differences there, but I'll show you here. You have your description, your property field type, if it's required, and if you want to allow multiple answers or not. We also have selected values like default value, suggested value, and your test value. If we go to advanced, you'll see that we have now a key and a title. And these are going to be important for anything that you have to configure in the policy workflow engine. This is how you track all of these fields and information. So maybe I need to know what a certain field is for my minting value, or I need to do calculations for the emission reduction schemas. Then I want to make sure I know what my keys are so that I'm putting all of my equations correctly, referencing the right fields. And we also have tabs for our artifacts modules. We'll be working in policies today, so I'll click on that in just a second. Our tools and schema rules. Then you could also go into the tokens, where you could manage your tokens, manage contracts, and you could manage roles. So here in our manage policies, we could go ahead and collapse this. You'll see that I'm already in dry run, but we have options to either stop, so you can continue editing your policy in the policy workflow engine or your policy configurator, and we also have the publish button. Now to go into the policy configurator, we could click on that button and we'll see all the workflow blocks that have been added into this policy to create the workflow that I've outlined. You'll see these are everything that we'll see in our trust chain. We have all the steps for our verification body, all the steps for our admin, which we're trying to follow the steps that are outlined by the American Carbon Registry. And you'll also see that we have different options here where you could put your roles, any navigation that we'll see as a progress bar in this policy. We have a tab for groups, topics, and tokens. And you can also start your policy through this page. So if I select go, we can get started here. So the first thing I want to do is create a new user. And we can go to that user by selecting virtual user 1. And now here I could assign a role. So the first user, I want it to be the project proponent. And we're going to select next. Now to fill this out today, I am going to be inserting my data through here, just because we have so many forms to cover before ending this webinar. So we see that we have information for the project developer. Anything that has this red asterisk right there would be required. And you'll see that we've filled everything out that's required, so we are allowed to submit. Now we're waiting for approval, so I have to go back to the administrator, just like we saw in the previous workflow. And our administrator now has access to this document, so they know that our project developer or proponent's name is Alex Carter. It's a account for a project developer, and they can view this document with all the information that was submitted before they decide to approve or reject. So we're going to select approve and move into our next step. Now going back to the project proponent, I want to create a project. This is going to be the project listing form. Okay, so in the project listing form, we have some help text just to let you know what section you're in. We're collecting information about maybe what standard you use, what methodology was used, the start date of this project. And we can send that in. Now, again, we need this approved So we are going back to the administrator. We can click on projects and see what was just submitted. So this is going to be our project name, our project ID. We know that the status, we're waiting for approval. And again, you can open each one of these documents so that you can review the information before approving. So now we see that our status has changed to listed. We have an assigned dropdown. There's nothing in there because we have not created and approved a verifier account. We can still add our project plan, but before I do that, I'm going to create the new account for the verifier. We went to virtual user 2, and we're going to select a verification body as the role. So here now we have to complete a form for the verification company. So we're seeing that this is just general information, the type of account we want to create, and we're also allowing the verifier to select what methodologies they've been approved for. So you can always add a field and select anything from the dropdown. This account now has to be approved by the administrator. So you'll see that there's a step here for verifier accounts. We see the name, we can open up the document, see what type of methodologies are approved to verify, and all of their company information and their contact person's information. Now that we've approved that account, you'll see that we can assign that verifier. So we've assigned them the project listing document that's going to be view only for the verifier. So now that we've gone back to the verifier, that it took us directly to a different form. This is the conflict of interest form. So we also want to fill that out and get it approved. Now all of that information's been plugged in. These are all questions to make sure that there were no prior relationships there that can cause an issue for a verifier and a project proponent. And that needs to be approved by the administrator. However, the project proponent will have a view-only access to that same document. So at this step here, we can approve it. If we decided that there is a conflict of interest, we can select this button, which will open up a comment box, and we can leave a comment as to why we've decided that there is a conflict of interest. And that comment will be available to the project proponent as well as the VBB, and they would know why they were rejected. So we've selected approve. And now that their account has been fully approved, we can go to the projects tab and see that they've been granted access to this project as they've been assigned by the project proponent. They have view only, so you see that there's no need to approve or reject it. They just have all the information associated with that project listing. And now we can go to the project proponent and send in our project plan. Okay, so here in the project plan, again, this is just information that's specific to the project with ID 923. We've completed all of the required fields and we can create. This is going to show up here in our project plans now, and we can assign it to the verifier. So now in the verifier's account, we can click on project plans, and we see that for this specific form, we do have an approve and reject button, so we can go ahead and view it, conduct any validation steps that we have to go through. So this can be maybe looking through this document, doing a site visit, a kickoff call. But I could go ahead and approve the document and move into my validation reports, where now I can submit any findings that I have. Now, all of these fields are what would have been provided to American Carbon Registry by a verifier, and this is coming directly from their validation and verification report template. So you'll see that we have an assign button. Alex Carter was our project proponent. We can assign it to them so that they can review what we've decided on. And we can move to the validation opinion here. Send in the data for that. And we also want to assign it to our project proponent, Alex Carter. So as the project proponent, I also have these tabs: validation reports, validation opinions, and I can view the document and approve or reject. Same thing with the validation opinion. I can view the document, approve or reject. Now we can go to the administrator. They should have the same reports. And we can do the same thing where we review those documents, approve or reject them. So once we've gone through all the validation steps, we have our project documents like our emission reductions. Traditionally, this might be maybe it's an Excel document that has all the data plugged in there. But in this case, we want to collect the data and the Guardian will handle the calculations. So the user does not have to do their own calculations and risk any errors there. Now the data I'm using here was our sample 2 from the Excel that I showed. So you'll see that there aren't that many data points collected for sample 2 since they only used equations 1 and 11 through 16. So we're seeing for our baseline emissions, we require these data points. We also have some questions about what option you're using so we know what default value to apply. And here are those questions about the project emissions. We could select yes or no. If I were to select no, all of this would disappear because we don't need that information. And same thing for this one. And as I mentioned in the Excel, if we had different types of fuel types, so maybe I had natural gas and propane, I can go ahead and select this button to add a new fossil fuel type and provide the data points for natural gas as an example. Okay, so we're seeing that the Guardian already calculated this value of our emission reductions, which is 63,179. And if I open up this document now, we're seeing all of the values that would have been hidden to the user when they're completing the form. However, now that they've submitted it, they can see what the values came back as. So we didn't have this in here before. This wasn't provided by the user. The Guardian calculated it and has provided it here in this form again. We're also seeing what would be our total volume of methane combustion, which is what we use to calculate that emission reductions. It would be this value multiplied by 28, and we would subtract our project emissions, which is about 15. And that's what we would see here in our emission reductions. So now we want to assign this. Taylor Brooks is our verifier. And I can move into the monitoring reports. So we're going to send in information for that. Here we see just some information about what did we do for our project monitoring, what parameters are we monitoring. So you'll see that, what equation does it belong to, where did we source this data from. And again, this is following ACR's templates for their monitoring reports. We're seeing that in this crediting summary, we're saying that for the year 2021, we had 63,180 emission reductions or removals. If I had to submit data for the year 2022, then we would send in another emission reductions just to make sure we have the calculation in place for that year and for the year 2023. However, for this demo, we're only sending in our emission reductions form for the year 2021. We can assign that to the verifier too. And the last form that we have to submit as a project proponent is our environmental and social assessment here. So once we've submit this, we can move to the third-party verifier. Okay, now in this one, we'll see that we have a lot of questions asking if the impact was positive, negative, or neutral, and you can submit your reasoning for that selection. And we also have a question if this is a community-based project. If it's not, then we don't have to collect the extra data points. If it is, you'll see that we have all of these data points that would be required as well. And this is the last form that we'll assign to the verifier. So now we're moving into the verification steps. We can open up all of these documents that were submitted, see the calculation results, all the data that was sent in. We are going to approve that document. We could do the same thing for the monitoring report where we open up the document and approve, and for the environmental assessments. Now, as a verifier, now that I've checked all of this, I can send in my verification report. And the last form that I would have to submit as a verifier would be the verification opinion. And I'm assigning this to Alex Carter, which would allow them to view the document as well. And similar to the monitoring report where we had different vintages, we'll see that we have 2021, 2022, and 2023. Just keep in mind that for this demo, we only sent in a emission reductions calculation report for the year 2021. Now, in the administrator's page, we do have access to all of these documents that were submitted by clicking into the tabs. We're in the emission reductions tab. We can see that we have view-only access to these documents, so we can review it as an administrator. We also have it for the monitoring report, the environmental assessment. And now when we move into the verification report, we can open up this document, make sure that it all looks good, and approve it. And the last step here is our verification opinion. So what we'll be issuing credits against would be the value that has been provided in the crediting summary by the verifier. So they would have verified this whole project, make sure that these values are correct. And you'll see that we have those 3 different years that I've been mentioning of 2021, 2022, and 2023. I want to issue credits for the year 2021 for this specific demo today. And it should be this value here. So in order to do that, usually when we select Mint, it'll automatically start. In this case, we will be asked what vintage we want to issue credits for. I want to issue them for the year 2021. And by selecting Create, we'll start minting those credits. Now, we do see these 2 operations here of close or reject. Let's say as an administrator, this didn't look correct to me and I don't want to issue credits to this project, then I could have selected reject. However, we are issuing credits. If I went through each vintage and issued credits for 2021, 2022, and 2023, and we're done with the reporting period for this project, then I can select close. And you'll see that this minting button will no longer be there. And just for this example, we can show what that would look like. Let's see if we have our verifiable presentation before we do that. You'll see that here we have the hash, the date, and the serials for these tokens. We can see our trust chain, which this here, what you'll see is our verifiable presentation. We have the token information, the recipient name, virtual user 1 was our project proponent, and you'll see that our tokens are still minting, so this will be updated once it completes, and you'll see that the token transfer will start. We also have our mint date, the verifiable signature, policy name. If our policy had a description, it would reflect here, and we see that we are in dry run. And here we have all of our different cards, so we see that our project plan was not approved. If I go back into this tab and we approve that, that would have been done early in the workflow. And we go back to our trust chain, we'll see that this has been updated to, it's still minting, and we have all of our VCs down here. So the policy was created by the administrator, we have our project proponent account, the GHG project plan, the validation body account, verification body account. We're seeing their conflict of interest, their reports and opinions, environmental assessments, monitoring reports. So everything that we've submitted should be here. We should also see that our tokens were minted, and we can open any of these VCs and see all the data that was submitted. Now, if we go back to this page here, just to show what this would look like, we can go ahead and select close. And you'll see that this project has finished its minting. We aren't allowed to continue minting to prevent any double counting here. and making sure that we're not issuing credits for 2021 again. And that was the end of our demo, but I'd like to mention if you have any questions or would like to submit any policy requests, enhancements, or a bug, you can do that through our GitHub. This is going to be the GitHub under Hashgraph Guardian. You can also reach out through Discord. And again, this is through Hedera, their Discord under the sustainability channel, or you could directly reach out to Envision. If it's anything related to Managed Guardian Service, it would be best to reach out to Envision either through our email, support@guardianservice.io, or there is a contact page on our website. All right, thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you here again next month. Thank you.